Hello, welcome back to another video with me, Meoni. This time we're continuing our look at interviews that have come out of recent events. This one covering PAX West over in Seattle, America. And this took place, as you know, a few days ago, and this was published on the 5th of September and has been updated on the 7th of September since. There'll be a link in the description for this article on RPG Gamer, and it's more of an interesting insight into the past, basically, for Naoki Yoshida, the producer and director for Final Fantasy XIV and indeed Final Fantasy XVI. And RPG Gamer sat down with Naoki Yoshida and asked a few questions about his past. So if you're interested in sitting down and listening to something, this is actually quite interesting from that perspective, at least. So Sarah Ferries is the RPG Gamer interviewer here, so she does the questions. How did you get from Hudson Soft to Square Enix? Why do you think you were picked to fix Final Fantasy XIV? Fix there in inverted commas. This is an interesting question. Naoki Yoshida says, first, after Hudson Soft, I transferred to another game development company within Japan, in a city called Sapporo, within the prefecture of Hokkaido, called Rocket Studio. They still exist to this day, and then once I went through Rocket Studio, then I moved on to Square Enix. Rocket Studio, while an independent studio, was comprised primarily of board members of upper management from Hudson Soft, as well as staff members from within that company, so I was familiar with all of the people there. While the members went independent and set up Rocket Studio, I was still at Hudson Soft working on Bomberman. I stayed with Hudson for about a year working on Bomberman. Then Hudson Soft was going to be moving on to their new project, and we were about to start a new production. Pre-production started, and 3.5 months if we had a fairly stable build. We were preparing to go into full production when I was called in by my section manager. I was told by them that the project is going to be cancelled. I didn't understand it. We had sign-off from the company. We had the sign-off from all the leads and the president. That manager was saying that, quote, well, of course, if I leave it up to you and your team, I'm sure you can make something really nice. But I want to make I want to make toys that would be sellable to kids, end quote. I was not under that mindset that these were supposed to be like children's toys. Bomberman as well. I was very serious about what I was doing, so I told my manager that I can't work for a company where the upper management thinks that these things are just toys to sell to kids, so I'm going to quit. That's how I left Hudson Soft. That's an interesting point. So, yeah, you don't really get this kind of insider sort of idea of what kind of transpired, what kind of made that knock-on effect. But yeah, clearly, shareholders and board directors have different marketing plans for IPs than for people working on them, right? That's surprise, surprise. So let's move down here. Yoshi says, after I left Hudson Soft, I was looking into other studios in Tokyo. I really loved Chunsoft. At the time, they were still an independent development studio. They say here, editor note, Chunsoft merged in with Spike to become Spike Chunsoft in 2012. Oh, interesting. I thought I'd heard that before. I was really admiring their works, Yoshi P says, so I was torn on whether to go there or to see if I could work with Yasumi Matsuno, who's, of course, famous for Final Fantasy Tactics. At the time, I believe he was at a studio called Quest. I was torn between those. And then I got a call from my colleagues, or former colleagues now at Rocket Studio, saying, hey, I heard you left Hudson Soft. We have a lot of projects on hand and we're kind of scrambling around. Would you like to help us? So that's how I went to Rocket Studio. I was with Rocket Studio for, I believe, 4 years. The company was comprised of a lot of engineers, and the president of that company is a really very skilled developer as well. I think he's a genius, but none of them were very good at sales and marketing or pitching ideas. Of course, as a development house, we needed to get clients, work with publishers and clients, pitch our ideas, or reach out to potential clients. My colleagues were not very good at communicating or trying to get ideas pitched in. So while I was working on 2 different projects and designing games, I would frequently go to Tokyo and try to pitch those ideas and presentations. But through that, I had the opportunity to work for Enix before the merger between Square and Enix while they were still different companies. I was able to work with them on a project that I had the opportunity to design from the start up. It was an online RPG. That online game that we worked with Enix to publish while Enix and Square were merging, so I was struggling to get work that was also part of that post-merger company, like getting Play Online set up. The game that I worked on was initially on the PC, but I was also assigned to make it compatible for PlayStation 2 as well. So there was a lot of work during that 3 or 4 years. Once that project was concluded, Yosuke Saito, who still works with Square Enix, overseeing the Nier franchise, came to me and said, "I heard you're in Tokyo for your business trip. Would you mind coming to the Shinjuku office to talk for a bit?" I was like, "Okay, Shinjuku office, I'll go." In the room was this whiteboard, and Saito pitched the idea about Dragon Quest Online, and that was my entryway to Square Enix. Of course, with Rocket Studio, I was very close to them, especially the president. He took care of me really well under his wing. I was really torn about transferring out of Rocket Studio to Square Enix. I consulted the president, his name is Mr. Takebe, and he's still with the company, leading as the president. I opened up to him and I told him that Square Enix had offered me this opportunity, and what should I do? He thought about it because I'm sure it would have been hard for him too. He thought about it for a little bit and then responded back, "I would miss you if you left Rocket Studio, but I feel like you should go to Tokyo." When I was with Hudson Soft, I was suddenly called to go to America. Mr. Takabe went to America for 3 years. He says, "My experience, my field of vision had expanded so greatly with that experience. I would recommend you to go. But promise me 2 things. First, because you're going to a company like Square Enix, I want you to climb to the top. I want you to get board member status. Second, please give us work to do." I mean, that's a good tactic, quite honestly, because he could have quite easily gone, "No, you're with our company forever." But the bigger picture there, always the bigger picture, right? I love that. That's a good business sort of mentality. Yoshi P continues, with Mr. Takebe's encouragement, I was able to join Square Enix. Then I worked on what became Dragon Quest X. I also helped out with some support items on Dragon Quest IX. Then I also helped with a project for Dragon Quest Monster Battle Road, which was an arcade game. I was able to reach out to Rocket Studios to support that title, so I feel like I was able to fulfill at least one of my promises at that point. The game did fairly well in arcades in Japan, so I feel like I was able to contribute to Square Enix, of course, but also to repay Rocket Studios for the support that they've provided me. Moving forward a little bit, there was a new game that I was preparing to work on rather, when I got word from Square Enix's president about the whole situation with the original 1.0 version of Final Fantasy XIV and all the problems that it was going through. He had talked about how we would need to kind of rectify all of this, and here we are. I was put on board the Final Fantasy XIV project, and eventually I was able to get on board member status, so I feel I have fulfilled both my promises to Mr. Takebe. I actually have an appointment to meet with him in the middle of September. We haven't seen each other in quite a while, but I'm so excited to see him. He's going to be coming to Tokyo to catch up. And there's a couple of pictures there of 1.0 Final Fantasy XIV, and then more recently, a screenshot from Shadowbringers there. RPG Gamer follows up then, do you plan on integrating or adding accessibility options into Final Fantasy XIV, such as colorblind options, playing the game one-handed, or other options that appeared in the Final Fantasy XVI, like the sound waves on the sides for people of hard of hearing to help widen your audience? Which is a fantastic question, because quite honestly, I think that the accessibility options in the game are a little bit limited. We have some colorblind options, but they're not very good from my understanding from people who have those difficulties. Their response on the forums has been that they're not really that adequate for especially in a modern sort of time frame, things have come on a long way. So let's see what Yoshi P says. Yoshi P says, actually, Final Fantasy 16 had those accessibility functions because 14 already had them. In Final Fantasy 14, we do have the color blindness settings. There are different settings where you can change the color scheme so that it helps you see better if you have those kinds of challenges looking at different colors. I believe there are 3 settings for that. Okay, yeah. For the sound, there was lots of sound cues that you could turn on in the configuration as well, where you can see the sound waves of the surrounding sounds as well. At least those 2 functions are already implemented into Final Fantasy XIV. Like I mentioned, the color vision diversity, we do have those 3 settings, but then we also receive feedback how we'd like to have more variations on that. So I'd like to discuss with the UI team. The UI team is also very active in their research on how do we make it more accessible for players. You mentioned about one-handed controls. I think right now there is a way. You kind of have to figure it out and customize it yourself. But we have the cross hotbar function. So if you set up your action palette to lean more towards like mostly use your right hand or use your left hand, I think that would help you be able to utilize just one hand for your controls. I have had examples where players would tell me that they were able to get through a raid by customizing their setup. That said, it is a little unclear to get to that, I think. It's not very obvious, nor is it the preset function that people could just easily kind of set up. So I think that's a good question that I should bring back to my team and discuss. It might allow for more opportunities for people who feel kind of intimidated by the different controls to have that available more readily. I'm going to discuss that with my team when they get back, end quote. Yeah, quite frankly, after seeing people's responses, yes, they do have some accessibility options in the game, but I think it is fair to say they do pale in comparison to Final Fantasy 16. In 16, the accessibility options are like way easier to toggle on and off, and there's lots of them. You know, lots of different customization. Yes, there is stuff in the game, but I think they could probably do more to make it easier for people with accessibility issues to, you know, properly play the game without having to go through YouTube tutorials of how to set up your cross hotbar. You know, we've all been there, right? You've probably been there. You probably sat here going, yep, I had to watch a YouTube video of how to do this. It should be just 1 or 2 clicks, shouldn't it, on the main menu? But there we go. RPG Gamer follows up. Has the development of Final Fantasy 16 impacted how you approach anything with the development of 14 or vice versa? Yoshi B says, I feel like it's more of the opposite. Let me explain. With Final Fantasy 16, the platform that it's on, the specifications to run the game, and the way we can show the graphics of the game is different. For lack of a better word, I feel it's more advanced technologically because it's a standalone game as opposed to ongoing online games like 14. The amount of cost and resources that we can put in is different. So are the specs of the hardware or the processing and whatnot for the game. I struggle to find the right word because it's not necessarily high or low, but for the lack of a better word, it's a little higher in terms of producing Final Fantasy 16. Of course, with Final Fantasy 16 and 14, we had different teams working on them. While they were separate, there were some developers on the 16 team and some of the leads that kind of moved into helping 14 to add to and support where needed. There were a lot of learnings and good points that we have gleaned from a production of 16, but I wanted to draw a clear line so we don't want to try and make 14 into 16, basically because that causes some of our developers to focus in on a certain point where it might start to look different or it might feel different. Final Fantasy XIV is supposed to be an MMO where we have many people playing at the same time, and every one of them has different views and values. If we start to hone in on just one single aspect, that would topple the balance. So these games are different. I wanted them to understand that we don't want to kind of focus too much into how we enhance the technical aspects or the visual aspects, and to be very mindful of it. There may be elements that might have worked with 16, but might not necessarily work for 14. So I think it was a very interesting experience because I had to kind of manage and control what they do bring back into 14. Another thing I did notice was that, of course, we already have a lot of players worldwide playing Final Fantasy XIV and 16. It was a standalone game, and from an MMO perspective, a lot of people still say, I haven't played Final Fantasy XIV because it's an MMO, but I see them playing Final Fantasy 16. So I was like, wow, if they see that it's a Final Fantasy that's standalone like Final Fantasy 16, then maybe they would try it out. So I felt that there is more opportunity and more space for us to kind of continue reaching for more people to get to know Final Fantasy XIV, end quote. It is very important to note there with that last point from this article that a lot of the development this last year has certainly felt like the focus and the previous year shifted towards a single player MMO. There are many more things that you can do as a solo player, especially if we bring in things like the trust and the duty support system, right? The duty support system is ongoing through Dawntrail. It'll probably be ongoing through 8.0 as well. The idea that if you don't want to join in a party with other players, you can go and do that casual low-end content for the MSQ, for example, right? But when it comes to the difficulty above that, they want you to engage with the MMO audience. And I think that's absolutely perfectly fine in my opinion, because who cares at the end of the day if you go and do story content with players or not, right? But when it comes to like trials, you know, extremes, savage tiers and stuff, even normal raids, alliance raids, those things really need the participation of players to make an MMO feel like an MMO. And I think personally that they've drawn a good toss-up between the two. In my opinion, there is also like a bigger focus on with Dawntrail. They've said at the start of Dawntrail, if I remember correctly, the design philosophy was that they focus quite a lot on that solo play and they want to have more cooperative MMO experiences. So I think there was a lot to learn from Shadowbringers, but also and Endwalker, but also at the same time, I think they might have gone a completely different direction. You got to remember at the end of the day, expansions are kind of test beds to see if an idea works. And throughout an expansion, you have multiple patches, right? And each patch either introduces something, revolutionizes something, or does nothing. The does nothing thing and just adds to the same cycle of what you have every single year is not going to gain new players, new returners, especially if you have other issues with the game, be that storyline, duty content, whatever it might be, PvP, right? There needs to be something for everyone, which is why the new focus with 7.35 onwards, as you've seen from the 88th letter from a producer live and various other interviews from Gamescom and indeed PAX that we haven't or have covered on the channel, the focus on trying to do scalable content so that there is more for everybody to do on each patch, but not necessarily more that is just solo oriented. Which is another reason why we had the moon stuff, right, instead of Island Sanctuary. It is supposed to be something that you witness other players and you engage with them to progress, you know, the leveling of the moon with Faena, for example, or the lunar surface on Mare Elementorum. So, has it worked? That's up to you to kind of say. In my opinion, I think they could have done a lot more with pieces of content to engage with more players, especially with the restrictions being level 10 or above for crafters and gatherers, but not really having much to kind of interact with other people. It still feels like a solitary experience, so I'm interested to see what other MMO aspects they go down the rabbit hole of, and I think it's important to engage as many people as possible with the content where they can physically make that happen. As we said, with the scaling technology that's coming in the 7.35 Deep Dungeon Pilgrim's Traverse, where you're able to, for the final boss, the floor 100 boss, you can put offerings into it, right? It's a separate duty. So you get these offerings from doing certain floors and challenge logs and stuff like that of the previous in the actual deep dungeon floors. And then if you put 15 offerings into the boss, you can make it harder and actually participate in there and you get some rewards. But you can also put in 40 offerings to make it comparable to that of an ultimate difficulty. Supposedly, that's what they said, right? So you can kind of tailor it to your own difficulty, 15 being the minimum, so like your basic mode, and then anywhere between that and 40 would be your difficulty slider. Of course, it remains to be seen how successful that will be, because in my opinion, as someone who has no idea about development, from that standpoint, how do they engage it to be, you know, without there being a sweet spot that people just stick to? Everybody will always choose the easiest point of access for anything, right? The most rewards for the least amount of effort, and people will figure that out somewhere on that bar. Is it worth putting in 15? Do you get so much more for putting in 20 offerings? That kind of thing. And the approach is supposed to be applying that technology, if successful, based on their feedback, they say, to other pieces of content, including variant modes, including the next part of the Forked Tower instance, which is the Occult Crescent content, the exploration field content stuff, with a dungeon there. And you know, other dungeons and trials and things. So it's a turning point for Final Fantasy XIV, and it's interesting to see how many things are influencing that design perspective, especially when we walk down memory lane for Final Fantasy XVI, seeing those sort of single player, you know, impact on Final Fantasy XIV. I think it had a bigger impact on the game than they would probably realize, or maybe they do realize, which is why we're going towards a more remember it's an MMO guys kind of perspective now. But yeah, getting more people to play a game, I mean, that's going to come down to good marketing, isn't it? More than just it's not an MMO. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. This article was pretty cool, and it's always nice to read through stuff that comes out of various events, real life or otherwise. And it's interesting to learn a bit more about Yoshi P. And if you didn't know about the Bomberman roots and Hudson Soft and some of the more interesting moments behind the scenes of the decisions that made Yoshi P join Square Enix to begin with, that was really cool. So thank you, RPG Gamer, for publishing your interview. Of course, this will be linked in the description at the top. Go give it some love. Go give some support to these fantastic people. Anyway, much love. Enjoy the rest of your day. More videos on the way, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.